It marks 10 years since the city of Detroit filed the largest municipal bankruptcy in the country's history. At the time, the city was about $18 billion in debt.
Retirement and pension funds were on the brink of collapse, and the city brought in an emergency manager to help with the finances. The Motor City has come a long way since then, having balanced its budget for 9 straight years.
Well, joining us now to talk about this historic progress is Doug Bernstein, an attorney with Plunkett Cooney, who helped put together the so-called grand bargain that saved the city and their financial problems. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me.
So can you summarize where we were 10 years ago versus where we are today?
Well, the city was facing all kinds of litigation. Creditors were chasing the money, and there was not enough money to go around. The bankruptcy was necessary to bring some order to the process, and rather than being in a bunch of different courts throughout the state, to centralize everything in front of one judge, bankruptcy judge Stephen Rhodes. And it was a gamble. It's expensive. There's still a stigma for bankruptcy, but at the time it was necessary.
How badly did the city, in your opinion, from what you saw, put themselves in a bad position, or was it something they could have avoided? Just describe to me just what was going on 10 years ago.
Well, it wasn't just 10 years ago. The city didn't go broke in a day, it didn't go broke in a month, it didn't go broke in a year. Think back to the infrastructure was built upon when the city was the 5th largest municipality in the country. It had 1.8 million people, and it built its infrastructure based upon that. The GM and Chrysler and Ford jobs went away, so you had this big population loss, you had a big tax revenue loss, but you still had the expenses, you still had all the pensioners, and the city was obligated to pay those pensions. So that obligation built up over time, but also you didn't have the revenue stream to support it. So it just wasn't one thing. But the other thing too is, rather than confronting the fact, much like a consumer would with a heavy debt, rather than confronting the issue and cutting back on spending, they continued to borrow.
How were they able to do that if there was no money left?
Well, at the end, they had reached their borrowing limit and they created ways to borrow more. And there was a bond deal that was entered into about 2011, 2012, where the city got another $2 to $3 billion and pledged the casino revenues, which at the time was the largest source of tax revenue for the city. The city defaulted in the bond payments, and the bond holders were going to come after the revenues. So if they captured that revenue stream, there would be no money left to pay bills.
What key steps were taken to get out of the red and bring us to where we are today?
You know, that's hard, Jeff, to just put in a brief sentence. You know, it was a series of steps, and it started really with Governor Snyder not wanting to kick the can down the road. He made the difficult choice of putting an emergency manager in place, and it turned out to be someone who had good bankruptcy experience, and it was a very gutsy move. It was very unpopular, and that was the start of it. There were a lot of very smart moves made and a good deal of luck. You had the right bankruptcy judge in Stephen Rhodes, who was experienced, who understood that the process had to go quickly, but due process had to be afforded to all the creditors. You had Judge Jerry Rosen, who headed up the mediators, cutting deals with creditors. So it wasn't one thing, it was a series of things, and really started by Governor Snyder's tough decision, but really orchestrated under Judge Rhodes's leadership.
There was a lot that went into that, but there was also a lot of support from Detroit business and the Detroit Institute of Arts to help get Detroit back on its feet, right?
It was actually charitable foundations that were called upon really to prop up the pensions and to save the Detroit Institute of Arts itself. So through some very creative thinking between Judge Rosen and Miriam Noland, who was then the head of the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, They devised a plan where charitable foundations would donate and contribute to support the pension, so the pensioners did not have to take such a drastic reduction in benefits. So it resulted in a variety of charitable foundations contributing $366 million, the state of Michigan contributing $350 million, and the DIA itself contributing $100 million, with all of that money being dedicated solely for the propping up of the pensions.
A yes or no question before we go here. Is the city still feeling the effects of this today?
Yes.
All right. Well, Doug Bernstein, partner with Plunkett Cooney, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.